Before we begin, we are a small channel on the path to 1,000 subscribers. If this kind of content interests you, subscribe now. It takes 1 second and makes a real difference. Now, let's go. Close your eyes. You stand before a door that has not been opened in nearly 600 years. Not truly. Behind it waits a woman in a cell 3 meters wide, chained to a post, sleeping in full armor because the men guarding her cannot be trusted. You have been told this story before. You have seen the paintings, the luminous girl, the sword raised, the white banner catching divine light. Forget all of that. It was built afterward by people who needed a symbol, not a person. She is not a symbol yet. She is 20 years old. She is cold, and she is afraid. And she has not been outside in weeks. The year is 1431. The place is Rouen, a city under English occupation in the north of what will one day be called France, but is not yet that. Not really. Not in any way that matters to the people starving in its streets. The castle of Bouvray rises over the river. Inside its walls, inside a tower, inside a room that smells of mold and iron, and the bodies of men who have sat outside her door for months, a prisoner waits for a trial that has already decided its verdict. She arrived here as a soldier. She will leave as a martyr. But right now, in this particular February morning, she is neither. She is a girl from a village, and the machine that will destroy her is already turning. Can you smell the damp in the stone? Can you feel the cold that the walls breathe out? The kind that lives inside your joints and refuses to leave? Can you hear the silence? Not peaceful silence, but the silence of waiting, of a door that could open at any moment and never brings anything good. Today, we go in. Before we go further, let me show you how we know this. The trial record of Joan d'Arc is one of the most complete judicial documents of the 15th century. The notaries who transcribed each session left us over 300 pages. The scholar Régine Pernoud spent decades reconstructing her life from these records, the rehabilitation trial of 1456, and contemporary chronicles. The historian Kelly de Vries has examined the military context in precise detail. These are not legends. These are depositions, questions, responses. Her own words, recorded by the men trying to condemn her. We will use those words. Now come back to the tower. Dawn has not yet broken over Rouen. The guards change in silence. One of them, a young Englishman, we do not know his name, will later testify that he could not sleep near her. Not because she was violent, because she prayed. Quietly, constantly, with a focus that disturbed him in ways he could not name. This is important. Remember it. She had been captured 8 months earlier, in May of 1430, at Compiègne. Not defeated in battle, trapped. She fell from her horse outside the city gates, when a French commander, Burgundian in his allegiance, closed the gates before her company was fully inside. She was pulled from her saddle and taken prisoner. She was sold. The Duke of Burgundy received 10,000 livres from the English, a sum that would feed a village for decades. A transaction, cold and clean, conducted in the language of politics and profit. And here is the first thing they feared. She had won. Not always. Not without cost. But she had lifted the siege of Orléans in 9 days, when the most experienced military commanders in France had failed for months. 9 days. She had marched through English-held territory. She had put a king on his throne. She was 17 years old when she walked into the siege. Imagine what that meant to the men who had spent their careers losing. The morning session begins at 8. You follow the guards down a corridor. The torches give off more smoke than light. The sound of your own footsteps comes back to you from the walls, slightly delayed, slightly wrong. The tribunal is assembled. 70 men, at various times. Bishops, theologians, canon lawyers, men with soft hands and sharp Latin, men who have read everything ever written about witchcraft, heresy, and the proper examination of those suspected of both. At the center, Pierre Cochon, Bishop of Beauvais, a man who had been driven from his diocese by the very French forces that Jean had led, a man whose career depended on English victory, a man conducting a trial of the church while being paid by the English crown. She enters. She is wearing men's clothing. This will become, in the end, the instrument of her death, not because of what it signifies magically, but because of what it signifies legally. We will return to this. First, look at her. She is thin. The records suggest she was not eating well. She carries herself with something the notaries struggle to describe and settle, grudgingly, on calling assurance. She sits down. The questioning begins. Do you know whether you are in the grace of God? It is a trap. If she says yes, she is claiming divine certainty, which is heresy. If she says no, she is admitting doubt in her mission, which undermines everything. The theologians are pleased with themselves. She answers, If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there. The room goes quiet. One of the notaries will write later that the examiners did not know how to proceed for a moment in which a 20-year-old girl from a village in Lorraine, who could not read, who had received no formal theological education, had just threaded a needle that trained ecclesiastical lawyers could not find. When Jean, years later, in the rehabilitation trial, in the testimonies of those who knew her, was described as fearless, that was not courage in the heroic sense. It was something quieter and more unsettling, a complete absence of the deference that everyone around her expected. That absence was, to them, unnatural. Step back for a moment. Look closely at what fear actually means in this context. The word witch, strega, sorcière, in the language of this era's terror, did not mean primarily what it means in the popular imagination. It did not require a cauldron, a broomstick, a pointed hat. It meant, in the precise theological language of the inquisitorial tradition, a person who had made a compact with the devil in exchange for power that exceeded natural human capacity. What counted as evidence of such a compact? Unusual success, influence that could not be explained by rank, education, or birth, visions, voices, clothing that violated the natural order assigned to the body wearing it. She had all of these. Her voices, which she called Saints Catherine, Margaret, and Michael, she described in sensory terms that the examiners found troubling precisely because of their specificity. She did not say she felt inspired. She said she heard a voice, to her right, accompanied by light. She said she could smell the presence. She said, under questioning, that when she could not hear them, she wept. The men in that room wrote down, possible demonic deception. They wrote this not because they were stupid. They wrote it because the framework through which they understood the world left no other available category for an illiterate village girl who moved armies. The afternoon session is longer. The light through the narrow window shifts from white to gray to nothing. Candles are brought. She has been questioned for hours on details that loop back on themselves. Questions asked in different forms seeking the same contradiction. Notice the smell. Tallow candles, unwashed wool, the cold sweat of men conducting business they know, on some level, has already been determined. She grows tired. You can see it in the transcript. Her answers shorten, but she does not recant. She does not give them what they want. This too was what they feared. Not the supernatural, the stubbornness. Because a woman who cannot be controlled by the men appointed to control her is, in the logic of this time, either touched by the divine or touched by its opposite. And the divine does not favor women who wear armor. The divine, according to the Church of 1431, favors women who are quiet and obedient and confined. The charges shift over the weeks. From witchcraft, which they cannot prove, toward heresy. Specifically, the heresy of claiming to answer to God directly, rather than to the Church as intermediary. This is where they find their footing. This is the charge that holds. She had bypassed the institution. She had claimed a direct line. Every bishop in that room understood what that meant, not just for her, for them. Think about the village she came from, Domremy, a small settlement on a contested border, where the sounds of war had been background noise since her childhood. She grew up knowing soldiers, knowing what occupation looks like from the ground, the requisitioned grain, the burned houses, the disappeared men. She was 13 when the voices began. Imagine the weight of that. 13 years old, in a village that smells of manure and wood smoke and anxiety, hearing something that you cannot explain to your parents, that you cannot explain to the priest, without risking accusations you don't yet have words for. Something that feels more real than the wall you are standing next to. Something that tells you what to do, and then you do it. And it works. When Jeanne, years later, refused to reveal the specific words of her private prayers to the tribunal, that was not defiance. It was the last boundary she had left. The court record shows her drawing that line clearly, calmly, in full knowledge of what refusing cost her. The only space the machine had not yet entered. She kept it. March becomes April. April becomes May. The pressure increases. She is shown the instruments of torture. She is told to recant or face the fire. For a moment, one recorded moment, she wavers. She signs a document. She cannot read what it says. The document she signs is not the short text she was shown. This is documented. This is not interpretation. Within days, she is back in men's clothing. The tribunal declares this relapse into heresy. Technically, this is what condemns her. One change of clothes. One act of putting back on what felt like hers. She was asked why she had put the clothing back on. She said it was more honest for her to wear it than to wear a dress. This sentence has been analyzed for centuries. It is, depending on who is reading it, a statement about identity, about safety from the guards who surrounded her, about a choice made when all other choices had been removed. But what strikes you, reading it now, is its plainness, its flatness, the absolute absence of self-pity. 600 years later, it still sounds like someone who knew exactly who they were. When the fire is lit, on the 30th of May, 1431, the executioner will say afterward that he is afraid for his soul, not because of witchcraft, because of what he saw on her face. The records do not say what that was. Step back. Look at everything we have seen. A cold room, a careful transcript, the smell of candles and wet stone and men who are afraid of what they cannot contain. A girl who answered questions she was not supposed to be able to answer. Here is what this trial was, stripped of the mythology that surrounded it almost immediately. It was a political execution dressed in theological language, conducted by men who needed her gone because she was evidence that the system which gave them their power was not the only system available. She had not gone through them. She had not needed them. And she had succeeded anyway. That is what they feared. Not the devil, the precedent. A woman with no rank, no education, no male authority to stand behind her, who had walked into the machinery of war and politics and briefly, impossibly, made it stop and turn around. The voices may have been divine. They may have been the product of a mind shaped by deep faith and childhood trauma, and the particular frequency of a border town in wartime. This is not answerable from here. But the fear she produced was real, and it was not supernatural in origin. It was the fear of those who hold power when someone without power acts as though the rules do not apply to them, and is right. You have seen this fear before. In other rooms, other centuries, other languages. The mechanism is the same. The transcript is always long and careful. The outcome is always decided before the first question is asked. What changes is what happens after. 25 years later, the verdict was annulled. They called it an error. They said the trial was corrupt. The charge is unjust, the evidence fabricated. They said this quietly, in Latin, in a room without fire. 500 years after that, the same church that burned her made her a saint. She had been right. She had known she was right. She had said so, on the record, in words that were carefully transcribed by men who were certain she was wrong. There is something in that worth sitting with tonight. If this video brought you closer to a history that is usually told from above, from the kings and bishops, and gave you instead the weight of a single cold room, a single human voice holding its line, then help us reach more people. We are a small channel on the path to 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription counts. Click subscribe now. It takes only a second. And before you go, leave a comment. What surprised you most? The precision of the trap they set for her? The document she signed without being able to read it? Or the fact that the church itself ultimately admitted the verdict was wrong? Write it in the comments. It takes only 15 seconds and helps this video reach more people. Thank you for staying until the end. Until next time.